I just watched the video again, and the mayor who came to the school and said that you guys, the school board, he said, he didn't say the teachers, the school board, you have to resign or I'm going to press charges. And this was in relation to teachers giving students pornographic writing assignment. So that's what he said. It's not being reported in the news very much, but the potential of something like this to snowball is out of this world because there's a pattern of behavior. There's been policies and philosophies adhered to in the educational system now for decades that are seriously, as they say, problematic. And so if it turns out that this mayor can actually bring charges against the school board, and what he said is that he's already had discussions with a judge, and that the judge believes that charges could be laid. There are millions of people, probably even in Canada, who would love to see this happen. And whether or not you understand their anger or not, or whether you see the, whether you feel the same anger or not, everyone would be very well advised to consider whether or not they are justified in being angry. The sort of conflict and trouble that something like this could lead to. I think that so much of the judicial system and the way that laws are written and the embedded bureaucracies and that sort of thing will make it very difficult to bring those sorts of charges. And if you were to go after the school boards and the teachers and administrators who do things that are not acceptable to a great number of people, it'd be absolute chaos. I bet you that there's a lot of high schools in Canada where, if it was up to me, the problem is that if you don't live in a country, then you don't really see what they're doing, and it might not be as bad as Canada. That surprises me. This sort of thing doesn't seem to be as bad in Canada. But I bet you there's districts in California or something. I'd probably fire them all. Then where would the kids go? You know, daycare, and there's so many difficulties that could arise from this. A very interesting development if it did. Okay, so if you watched other school board videos, then you'll see where this is coming from. I can't see because I don't have my glasses. Ultimately, there are but three systems of ethics. These conceptions of the ideal character and the moral life. Will Durant, The History of Philosophy. This is such a funny book because I read it, get absolutely excited about what it says, and go on and on about that, and then forget that I've read the book, and I think that I figured this shit out, and then come back to the book and I read it again and I go, oh yeah, it's all been underlined everything and all that, and there is, oh, this is where I learned it. This is the best book I've ever read. I could read another book and I'll say that one's the best I've ever read, but I think if I really gave it a lot of thought, this would probably be it. He's a show-off as a writer. He's a show-off as an academic, but God. Okay, so he says, ultimately there are three systems of ethics, three conceptions of the ideal character and the moral life. One is that of Buddha and Jesus, which stresses the feminine virtues. considers all men to be equally precious, resists evil only by returning good and love, identifies virtue with love, and inclines in politics to unlimited democracy. The Christian ethic is related to the idea of democracy because, as he said here, we regard everyone as precious. If you regard everyone as precious and won't let them participate in their own governance through elections, or you won't let them exercise freedom of speech, and you don't regard them as precious. So, democracy is intimately tied up with democracy. Did I say that right? Christianity is intimately tied up with democracy. Okay, another is the ethic of Machiavelli and Nietzsche, which stresses the masculine virtues, accepts the inequality of man, relishes the risks of combat and conquest, identifies virtue with power, and exalts in hereditary aristocracy. Aristocracy, isn't that related to monarchy? So it's a hereditary. It says here, hereditary aristocracy. Can't say that I get that because the son of a king might not be the most powerful person around. So anyway, so you've got two conceptions of the ideal life. One is the feminine, one is the masculine. One emphasizes, he didn't say this, but I'll go ahead, tolerance, forgiveness, compassion, forgiveness. Did I say that already? Responding to anger and hatred with kindness and love and that kind of thing. And if you're going to react to anger and hatred, you're a lot better off. This goes on to Spinoza, who talks about this more later in this book. Maybe I'll get to it. Yeah, you've settled the person right down. If that person hates you and recognizes that that's being reflected with love, well, it's hard to hate a person that doesn't hate you, right? It's hard to hate something that you're not afraid of as well. So if you can respond to hatred and anger with confidence and love, you settle the situation out. It's brilliant psychology. It's brilliant philosophy. It's the basis of the Western world in a sense. Except we're open to inquiry and new ideas, aren't we? So we come to the ethic of Machiavelli and Nietzsche, which stresses the masculine virtues, accepts inequality of man, relishes the risks of combat and conquest and rule, and identifies virtue with power. I'll put it there. A third, the ethic of Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle. Honestly, didn't this come more from Aristotle? I don't know. I think it did. Defines the universal applicability of either the feminine or the masculine virtues. Denies the universal applicability of either the feminine or the masculine virtues. Considers that only the informed and mature mind can judge according to diverse circumstances when love which should rule and when power. Therefore equates ethical behavior with intelligence and advocates a varying mixture of democracy and aristocracy, which is the best you're going to do. You're always going to end up with an aristocracy, whether it's a capitalist system or a social. The powerful rise. And The powerful do what they can, and the poor suffer as they must. I think that would be a Nietzschean idea. And before you get too critical of the Nietzsche idea, um, you have to consider that a person developing his powers to the greatest extent possible is a pretty amazing thing. In a non-violent context, you get people like Elon Musk, right? You want these men or women to be developing their power to whatever extent is possible. And if that involves stepping on the heads of some lesser people, well, that's going to happen. The problem is that when you have people with too much money, say, for example, that made a lot of money off of that's making a lot of money off of the inflation that Trudeau economic policy has created, well, you're going to be seeing people that have become rich and powerful without having contributed anything. They would have in their previous life. But as assets go up, those people and their children become powerful and haven't contributed a goddamn thing. Have they? And so that brings us back to the current situation again. I'll just do this again. I think repetition is the soul of learning, the soul of teaching. What do you do with teachers who are giving assignments to teenage kids to write about their sexual fantasies? So the student would know that he or she had shared his sexual fantasies with his male or female teacher, gay or straight teacher. And that would inform their relationship, wouldn't it? You know, to put it euphemistically or gently or however you'd like to put it. I think that you could get to the point where teachers have just seen so much of this that doesn't even mean anything, which is just degrading and disgusting in its own way. Imagine you've given out this assignment, you've read it over and over again, pornography by 16, 17, you didn't even think about it. Wow. That bugs me even more. I'd like to see those papers examined for what would you call it? Semen and vaginal fluids. What do you think the teachers are doing? What do you think that the kids are doing when they're writing it? Should know what the male teacher's sperm looks like and see how often you find it on the paper. It's like cocaine, you know, a long time ago. It was $100 bills, I'm sorry, was all covered in cocaine. So is this a time for the Christian attitude, for the feminine attitude? Or is it time for the Machiavellian, Nietzschean attitude? If you can't accomplish anything through the school board, it's impossible. And it has to be pointed out that the system that exists now is very much the product of feminists, whether they're female or male. Most of the people in education are female, and they brought us to this point. They brought us to the point where we're criticizing our own civilization, where we criticize critical thinking, not really respecting science. A big part of the feminist movement in the beginning was sexual liberation. This is an extension of that. Nothing hurts children more than, after a certain age, than removing their father or father figures. Sociological fact.